In a world of EMS podcasters, EMS Office Hours is the only live podcast bringing you the latest topics and opinions in EMS. Turn down your scanner and turn up your speakers as we join Jim Hoffman and Josh Knapp on their latest EMS podcasting journey.
Welcome to EMS Office Hours. This is Jim Hoffman, and today I have a special guest on the show. I have Greg Friese from EMS1, the editor there. Greg, thanks for joining me for another show today.
Yeah, Jim, thanks for having me. It's good to be back. It's been quite a while. You and I used to do these podcasts pretty frequently.
Yeah.
But it's probably been a few years.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that when I was leading up to this, about how we did the Office Hours podcast. We had done that EMS boot camp for a while as well, those online presentations and stuff. And it's always good to reconnect and, kind of see where everybody's at and kind of keep in touch with what's happening in our EMS lives,
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
So, Greg, I asked you on today just to sort of I want to get your input and your insight, because as being with EMS1 and all, which I think is probably, I guess, the leading online EMS website, especially when it comes to news and articles and things like that. Like how you guys choose content and what sort of directs it, or what sort of dictates what you guys decide to do. Is it advertising, dollars that come in, and you want to kind of focus your content around, sponsor products and services and stuff, or is it something else? Is it the regular news that happens on a daily basis, or maybe a mixture of both? I was just wondering what that is. I think it might be interesting for people to hear how you guys go about choosing that content.
Yeah, those are a good set of questions, Jim, and I'll try to address each of them. On a day-to-day basis, our editorial team for EMS1 as well as FireRescue1.com and Police1.com, we're finding or creating and posting content in several areas. First, as you mentioned, would be news. That we have a team that's, we have access to the wire services like Associated Press, so we're looking for news on the media wires that would be of interest to our readers. So, for example, some days it's an active shooter incident or a mass casualty incident. Sometimes an ambulance crash or a helicopter crash will make it onto a wire service. The wire services also will pick up some of the maybe more unique ways that people become ill or injured, or maybe there's a disease outbreak. There's a lot of opioid epidemic coverage that makes it onto the wire services. So we'll share that out if it's relevant to our audience. And then we're also looking for locally reported news that we're able to aggregate or rewrite. And I think a lot of us experience aggregated news oftentimes without realizing it. When it's presented as, here's just an example of, two paramedics injured in ambulance collision at intersection. It would be like the lead or the first sentence, and then the second sentence would be, WCNC reports that the collision happened Saturday evening between the ambulance driven by such and such paramedic and a municipal bus leaving two people injured. And so that WCNC in that case is the local news source that's being aggregated.
Right.
And then we do some original news writing. Either organizations send us press releases about events or happenings or maybe even new products. So news would be one type of content. Another type of content is what I call original expert written content. So we have people that are in the field, maybe as providers or field training officers, middle management, chiefs, maybe they're even retired and working in more of a consultant or contractor capacity, as well as educators and training officers. And they're putting together a variety of content that could be a range of sort of, how to correctly assess patient's blood pressure, or it could be a more complex topic, 5 things paramedics need to know about ECMO, or, advances in stroke patient assessment and care. So that original content's oftentimes focused on helping our readers do their jobs better and more effectively. And then there's also an element of that expert content that might be analysis or opinion or essay. So, for example, recent to when we recorded this episode, 11 people were killed at a synagogue in Pittsburgh a few days ago. And so this morning, I wrote what's called a rapid response format about that event. A couple weeks ago, I wrote an opinion piece about a group of EMS providers, either in North Carolina or South Carolina, that faced some consequences for their decisions they made while being an ambulance strike team for Hurricane Florence.
That's actually my neighboring EMS provider.
Well, something I think possibly for all of us to learn, so trying to, in that situation, what can we learn from those news events, some good, some bad, and, because there's, hopefully many of us will go a career without ever having to respond to an active shooter, but it's also a potential for any EMS provider anywhere to respond to an active shooter.
Sure.
So that original content would be a second type of content. The third type of content is we can develop a pretty good sense of what are things people searching for on Google that we can potentially answer for them. So it's pretty easy to know that people are searching for how to pass the NREMT.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that we would develop NREMT success tips, or 5 expert tips to pass the NREMT exam. And so you start looking for where there's search traffic in areas that we have expertise, related to patient assessment or pharmacology or different medical conditions, and develop content around there. All those news, original content, and search traffic articles, you asked about the influence of sponsors. Those 3 types are all developed independent of sponsor interest.
Okay.
We, like many media companies, have a custom content or a content marketing division where everyone from the New York Times to EMS1 to any number of media outlets, Forbes, just sort of you name the industry, and there would be a publication doing branded or custom content. So we'll have sponsors that come to us and say, we're interested in having EMS write for us and host and promote an article. Let's say it's 10 things to know about treating trauma. And it would be clear to the reader, the article would say, sponsored by, and then the name of the sponsor. That we're very careful about disclosing sponsorship of content that's developed based on sponsor requests, sponsor approvals of our ideas.
It's interesting. A couple of questions. When you're talking about the actual news that you get, you said from being with the wires and all and getting that news from that, is that stuff that you have people actually actively looking for, or is it like a feed that just gets plugged into the site based on keywords or based on location and keywords and stuff like that? Or do you actually have people that kind of go out and watch the wires coming in and then kind of like cherry pick what you guys think are going to be, valuable to the site and then posting it on the site that way?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And, I should look up the sort of history of, say, the wire service. That I imagine historically there was probably this ticker or machine that would sort of spit out papers as they get sent out over literally the wire. Mm-hmm. And then news editors would look and say, oh, should we set this into type for our newspaper? Now, say the Associated Press has a searchable database where our staff will log into the database and use keywords and it's search results would come up. So if you search by keywords like ambulance or paramedic or emergency medical technician or opioid epidemic or naloxone, it would show, articles by date and relevancy. And then our staff members make a curation decision of, is there enough here for this to be relevant enough to our readership? So, there's also, another wire service through all the Tribune media companies, and a lot of their articles end up being very, very local. And so, if, a local news story of, vehicle crash, one person transported by ambulance, we might hit on that just because we're searching for that term ambulance.
Right.
But it's not really a national news item for us to share out. Paramedics respond to every day, a single person injured in a motor vehicle collision.
I gotcha. And just a couple of things I just ask you as well. The talking about like that news and stuff, like you said, doing like sort of a rapid response, things like that. I've had people, kind of like roll their eyes, and hopefully you can maybe get some clarification on it and kind of give your opinion on it. Is like something like that happens, like an active shooter type thing, or some sort of tragedy that affects, EMS, or that, is a big thing for EMS. I've had people who have come to me or who have commented that now they're going to see all kinds of stuff from, the EMS websites showing up on the Twitter feed and on Facebook, and they're going to get inundated with all these opinions from every author that is at that website, or opinions from everyone that is within sort of that inner circle, and everybody's spewing their own sort of opinions and commentary on it, and they feel like it's a way to get visits to a site, a way to get sort of clickbait to get to the web, to bring them into the website. And I just wonder what your take is on that. I feel that, I understand that there's a news element to that, but I've had people, actually, say to me that they feel that it's sort of, I guess, capitalized on when it happens. Yeah.
So the critique that I think that we hear most often is the too soon.
Right.
Why are you writing about this now? And, I think there's a couple things. One is that's when the interest is highest, that people express a desire to wait until a later date, but when that later date arrives, they're no longer interested.
Right.
Is number one. The other thing is that, we also know where traffic and attention on our sites is going. And, so for example, I mentioned the ambulance strike team and some of the poor decisions that maybe some members of a really small group made that led to terminations and suspensions.
Uh-huh.
That was the highest performing news item on EMS1 by several orders of magnitude. So there was high reader interest in that. And so it made sense that, well, if people are interested in this, let's see if there's a conversation we can continue having about this. And, so some additional writing on my part has led to additional correspondence, people discussing the situation. I actually need to add to my article. There's somebody from, a whole different part of the country that said, we had a similar problem, which led to us developing a protocol, sort of expectations of behavior. And here it is. I asked, so can I share this? And so we're going to share that out with our readers as a way to keep that conversation moving. The third thing I would add is that, we're regularly reminded that I think it's, we're fortunate in this regard that whether it's Police One, Fire Rescue One, or EMS1, we always have readers that were there. And if it's a fatality, we have readers that maybe were even at that scene where the police officer was shot and killed, or readers that responded to the collision after, for the ambulance that was hit head on. And and readers that were closely involved. And so as I try to approach, whether it's me writing or working with one of our authors on any of the sites, first of all, yes, we try to acknowledge, like, we don't know all the facts yet. That's just the nature of being able to provide analysis as you're working with the best available information at the time. And then second, we're writing about things that our readers did or didn't do, and people they knew and were friends or just loved dearly. And so I think that's an important responsibility for us, and hopefully that's reflected in the approach and tone that we take.
Right. Yeah, and I guess that can be difficult at times, like you said, especially when you get that kind of criticism of too soon type thing. I remember with the Vegas shooting, and there was somebody, the girl that runs the Code Green campaign started trying to make, sort of a fund me page or whatever for the EMS people that were there to help them, through some of the issues they might be having with experiencing that type of a scene. And people were immediately jumping on her in the comments and the feeds about, how do you even know they need it yet? Why are you trying to right away to try to get money out of us and stuff like that? And, and it kind of takes away from what her goal was, So I guess there is that sort of that fine line, you kind of have to walk, and I think most of the time people see it for what it is. And I think there's probably a smaller percentage of people who kind of focus on the too soon element of it.
And I also just want to push back on the characterization of clickbait, whether it's leveled against EMS1 or our properties, or even our colleagues at EMS World or GEMS, that clickbait by definition is when the content that you click through to does not match, what you were promised or sold by a headline in a social post. And so my choice to write about a mass murder at a synagogue in Pittsburgh is analysis and what I might be thinking about in the immediate aftermath. As long as the article that the readers click through to is what I've promised, that that's not clickbait. And so
it's good you make that sort of clarification, Greg, because I do see, not just with just in anything, a lot of websites that I go to, a lot of business websites that I'm at, and things like that, and podcasts, and I read their articles and all, and you'll get people who accuse them of clickbait. I think people don't necessarily know also exactly the true definition of it,
Yeah.
And I think that's important. That it's good that you clarify that, because it is true. It's not when you see a headline that talks about a mass shooting and the article's on mass shooting. That's not
right.
clickbait,
And just to circle back to my earlier example, we know that people are looking for how to pass the NREMT. So if we offer up an article, 5 ways to pass the NREMT, that's a clicky headline.
Sure.
It's meant to be. And then there in the article is, 5 expert suggestions on what it takes to pass the NREMT.
Right.
We've offered up exactly what people are searching for with content that matches the headline.
Greg, one final question, I guess, on this.
Yeah,
I know you mentioned before about kind of producing content based on, like you said, like popular search terms with Google and, things like that, as far as, ways to pass the national registry and things like that, or how to do a certain skill, or how to assess a certain type of patient. Do you have people also that monitor sites like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and see popular conversations going on there as well? To sort of create content or have ideas for content based on that also?
That's a good question, Jim. So I think some of that is our contributors, the people that are writing for us regularly, are well connected, whether it be through their day work or their involvement in social networks or, events that they're attending, and, for lack of a better term, have their finger on the pulse of the industry.
Yeah.
I think there is certainly times where I've seen, a social conversation, say, happening on Facebook, maybe about a product or an event or a protocol or some research that gets me to thinking, oh, hey, I should look into that and see what there is to be said about that. One of the example I can think of off the top of my head was, I think it was earlier this year, early 2018 or maybe late 2017, a researcher at Harvard, I believe, who also was sponsored by a pharmaceutical company, got some notoriety because he did some analysis of EMS incident data and said, there's all these cases of hypoglycemia, and glucagon is very, very rarely administered. And that got quite a bit of, I think, partially Harvard and diabetes. And, anytime there's kind of a news story about, so-and-so should be doing something, but they're not,
Right.
That kind of news can get quite a bit of traction in the sort of mainstream media. So that led, and then I started seeing, well, paramedics and EMTs are talking about this. This is kind of like, false premise that we've got all these different ways we can treat hypoglycemia. And then that urged me to dig a little bit deeper into, how often is EMS going out on these hypoglycemia calls? What other treatments are getting used? Oral glucose, D50, D10, and glucagon, and sort of like what's the relative frequency of each,
Right.
To kind of keep that conversation going.
I gotcha. Well, Greg, I so appreciate you jumping on and talking to me about this stuff. I hope that the listeners will find it useful and interesting to kind of get a sort of maybe kind of a behind the scenes view on how that content gets put out there. And kind of think about that when they're reading the content, where it's coming from and that it's well thought out. It's not something that's done lightly or taken, like you said, on a just because it's hot, you jump on it and try to milk it for what it's worth type thing,
Yeah.
So,
Can I add one other source or way that we end
Sure.
up with the news articles and also original content? Is that readers contact us directly. They can email us, editor@ems1.com. Sometimes people are sending us locally reported news stories. Hey, we want to make sure you saw this. It's also news and events and accomplishments of their service. And, so we've received some great news articles that we otherwise wouldn't have been aware of. Because those, whether it's a chief or a public information officer or somebody acting with the permission of the chief or public information officer is contacting us and saying, we want to make sure you know about such and such. And, one of the things that I'd really encourage readers where they can really shine in front of their colleagues or peers. So I think it's great, say when a service receives local recognition for a new program or an innovation. So, for example, the St. Charles County Ambulance District, which is outside of St. Louis, Missouri, they've done a number of things. One, a few years ago during a heat wave, they were going door to door in areas they knew they had a lot of geriatric residents and handing out bottled water and just checking in on people. And that was like a really outstanding local news story, paramedics caught being good. And what's the even better follow-up for a website like ours and our audience is, a short, here's what we did, but then why we did it and how we did it. Same thing, there was Guilford County EMS in North Carolina is getting really involved in harm reduction efforts around opioid abuse and addiction. And so they're getting some great local news coverage that's well-deserved. Even better is when they've, put together contents and, this is why we decided to take a harm reduction approach. These are the steps we're taking, the partners we have. So a chief in Nebraska or a EMS agency in Washington or anywhere in the country could read that and think, oh, I could try that here in my area.
Yeah. Right.
Learn from my peers and try something new.
No, fantastic. Greg, again, thanks for joining me. One other question I want to ask you. I've been trying to ask this of people that join me on the podcast and my peers and all, kind of off topic, but I heard this on another podcast and I thought it would be kind of an interesting question to ask people. I hope I don't put you on the spot on it, but you hear a lot of questions get asked in EMS, how to pass the NREMT, what questions are on the exam, things like that. What do you think is one of the questions that does not get asked in EMS that should be getting asked?
This is a good question. What should be asked in an examination, you mean?
Just in anything. I mean, you hear a lot of people, when are we going to get more money?
Okay.
When are we going to require college degrees? That stuff you hear all the time. But what's something that you don't hear that you think should be asked more frequently?
So question is, why are you limiting your recruitment efforts to people that have already passed EMT school or paramedic school? And it's a very small pool of people with high competition with your competitors. I meet a lot of people that have come into EMS as a second career, and people that will talk about, our best paramedics were people that used to be teachers or plumbers or computer programmers or salespeople. And I'm like, well, instead of setting up a booth at a EMS conference, why don't you set up a booth to recruit staff at a teacher conference or a hospitality fair where you can explain to people the training requirements and then help guide them towards schooling and becoming a member of your organization. So my question is, why are you limiting your recruitment efforts to people that are either already in or have already finished EMT school?
All right, that's pretty good, Greg. A good question, and I definitely agree with you with that. I know the agency that I'm at is going out, trying to get high school students interested in EMS and getting them interested in taking an EMT course and showing them around the building and around the ambulances and going to the schools and stuff and kind of pitching almost like a military recruiter would, with high school seniors.
Yeah,
so
great.
Definitely, I think a good approach, and I think you're right. I can agree with you that I've come in contact with people who did other careers before EMS, and they tend to, I think, take a different approach and a different look at it. I don't know. That might be another podcast to kind of discuss why that may be.
Yeah, be happy to talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Greg, let's end it there, man. I really appreciate it. Everyone go check out EMS1.com. If you've never heard of it, I don't know what rock you've been under, but it's, to me, I feel it's the best EMS website out there, especially when it comes to news and content by a lot of great authors on the site there. So, all right, Greg, that's it, man. I'll end it there. Anyone have any questions, comments, send them over to me. It's contact@emsofficehours.com. Until next time, as always, I'm Jim Hoffman. Stay safe.